So my presentation, I don't know if I have enough time for all this here. So I want to say first something about our discussion we had in our group, and this was more how to approach this kind of research. And this is a little bit about its normative and a non-normative approach to this. And then I want to go into the different fields and the different results. Yes, and this was, and we have published all this also in this book here. As a researcher on these issues of coverage of minorities in the media and migrant journalists' representations in newsrooms, also mainly makes use of normative approach. And it takes a starting point from also post-colonial normative theories and claiming that domestic media discourse on minorities is grounded in constructing the other in relation to a normative self that is better than the other, is underdeveloped and under-civilized in relation to a developed and civilized self. And studies on media have shown, according to these theories, that media play a conscious sense of being above or better than the other. And in line with also political theories, the media have been ascribed the function of integrating all members of society by a media coverage mirroring the ideal of multicultural societies and by a staff representing different ethnic cultures within newsrooms. And the media are expected to support the dominant values and moral standards of their own societies. And media research is within this approach about exploring media's fulfillment of this role or not. And if not, why? I mean here the scholarly approach. And in Sweden, we can also see that the discourse is very much determined by media's failure to adequately address integration issues. And regarding the representation of media workers with migrant backgrounds in the media, the discourse is focused on discrimination and partially on structural discrimination too. And in order to find explanations and ways of changing practice. Also, in Germany, the academic media and migration discourse is dominated by a normative ideal of integration. And when I think researching the relationship between media and multicultural society, it seems to be difficult to isolate normative or even ideological considerations. And however, this approach can create problems if we see our study object only through a haze of normative distinction that is good and bad, determining if the newsroom is acting badly or not according to the norms of a multicultural society. And a strictly normative perspective implies looking at phenomena where the media fulfill or do not fulfill the expected role. But I think if we want to take to account the different realities of a complex world, e.g. of the newsroom's own mode of operation, we observe that these realities are not always in accord with normative theories. Here, instead of looking at how the media ought to behave, an alternative way of researching this issue could involving omitting the modal verbs ought or should to allow more for an unprejudiced perspective. And this perspective only focuses on the question of how the media behave. And the above is not only an analytical strategy, but is also grounded in theories which are called descriptive, for instance. And these theories want to explain processes without only asking whether they are good or bad or if they turn out predictably. They take into consideration a differentiated and complex world that can be explained by a wide range of categories, and not only by normative ones. If we wanted to broaden the perspective and wanted to go beyond normative statements, we can generally make use of observation theories. And it means epistemologically, the starting point is basically empirical. also by noticing the constructive character of our research. And in line with this approach, the interview answers we have received in our research are understood as construction of description of an experienced newsroom reality and not as a blueprint of this reality. And these descriptions are the result of observations and are guided by distinctions that are drawn when describing a newsroom situation. And according to these observation theories, observing means also generally drawing distinction. It is by noting a difference that we become aware of things. In other words, differences are of relational quality. A thing is different only in relation to some other things. As applied to our research question, if you want to say something about the diversity in newsrooms, we can only say something about the relationship of the observer, the interviewee, to the observed, that is, to the newsroom, to the addressed topic, and this also in an interview situation. And more precisely, a distinction is not drawn by the word of the newsroom itself. It does not describe a phenomenon. It's also drawn by the interviewee in the interview situation and describe the form of the phenomenon from the perspective of the observer. It sounds maybe a little bit abstract, but I think I want to show it in the study. And with this approach, we create an opening for other interpretations, but they are not arbitrary since they are related to the empirical outcome and accomplishment of interpreting according to the scientific system's own house. I will come back to this when I go in the interview answers. And I only want to say something short about this. Maybe it's not so necessary here. And generally, we can maybe conclude that media organizations in both countries, also in Sweden and in Germany, face similar challenges, and I think also in Europe as a whole, and that journalists talk about similar experiences, but that there are also differences. Sweden has more years of experience in working with diversity issues, where Germany has only recently begun discussing diversity in the media. And some Swedish media organizations have introduced documented diversity plans in order to systematically implement cultural diversity in the organizations. And in Germany, the process of implementing diversity is at its initial stage, and many journalists experience positive effects as a result of their migrant backgrounds. And active diversity measures in the form of documented diversity plans, as we know from Sweden, are conspicuous by their absence, with only a few exceptions, including 2 public service organizations, and are more dependent on single ad hoc decisions within the specific workplace than on systematically documented strategies. Within our project, we have also conducted a telephone survey study in May and June of 2008, and in order to explore attitudes toward diversity in Swedish news media. It was also only in Sweden. A news organization of various size, comprising newspaper, radio, and TV were called, and 103 participated. Officials in charge of the company's diversity programs responded to a question survey, and of the surveyed companies, 87% report that diversity efforts are very important or important to the company. And most companies agreed that diversity programs are good for business and have an influence on the journalist product and on the good will of a company. And however, we can see here newspapers lag behind in their diversity programs compared to radio and TV. And one explanation is the legal requirement of public service broadcaster to serve all, and these are the private companies here. And less than 1/3 of the newspapers report that they have documented diversity plan, and the share is 60% in TV and so on. And this has also consequences for how the organizations view and value diversity efforts. And organizations with diversity plans have significantly more positive assessment of the benefits of diversity. And the newspapers seem to rate the benefit of diversity less than television and radio newsrooms. So when it comes now to foreign-born journalists who we have interviewed, the numbers are very low in both countries. In Sweden, there are 5.9% of the journalists are foreign-born, and only 2% were born in a non-European country. And in comparison to information from Germany, there are no statistics, so it's very vague, that only about 2 to 3% of journalists have a migrant background. And only 1.2% of all print journalists have the migrant background, and that more than half of them work as freelancers. Most of them come from Europe, mainly Turkey, Spain, and Italy. A survey on print media journalists with a migrant background of 2009 has shown that immigrant journalists are younger, most of them between 26 to 85. They quite often come from working class families, and most of them are female too. And like the average German media worker have a university degree. And in general, in both countries, most migrant journalists are employed within broadcasting, are not within the newspapers. So, about the interview results, and this I will here refer mostly on the interviews in Germany because I have done these interviews there. And based on the interview utterances, I want to explore how ethnicity functions in the context of journalistic production and how it gains importance within specific contexts. I use the term ethnicity to denote an aspect of one's relationship to a group of people with whom one shares a cultural heritage and whose culture is defined as different from that of other groups. One's membership in an ethnic group need not depend on attributed racial characteristics or on nationality. When one discusses people with migrant backgrounds, cultural differences are observed as distinctive and become socially relevant. And social relationships acquire an ethnic dimension. The analysis of the interviews, which are structured around these themes here, recruitment, the coverage of topics, issues of language, careers, impact on reporting, and so on, is structured around these themes. In order to analyze how ethnicity functions in media production environments, I relate ethnicity to the distinction of inclusion and exclusion. I did not choose the distinction of discrimination or equality because this distinction is used in a moralizing manner, also good or bad. It includes too many normative statements. And to illustrate this, generally, most people are excluded from media organization, similar to other organizations, which is neither good or bad thing. But if we state that most people are discriminated against within media organizations, so we would judge it as negative. Or another example, if an informant says that he is excluded from the job because of turn taking, on the one hand, this might be bad for him, but on the other hand, this might be good in regard to respecting the rules of the organization. So this distinction of exclusion, inclusion allows different observer perspectives and therefore more options and combinations in the analysis of the material. In contrast, employing a normative distinction, good-bad, would restrict the complexity of the interviews already from the beginning, as the attention would be to discuss only distinctions that are observed as wrongfully drawn. Also, I think that the distinction inclusion, exclusion, however, is a cognitive rather than a normative one. It generally denotes a person's general participation or non-participation in the communication that takes place within the media organization. That's why it's a very broad distinction. Now we want to come to this complex of employment or recruitment. And when discussing the employment situation, my interview's observations can be divided in three categories. The first one is a migrant background as an advantage. The second, a migrant background as disadvantage. And the third one, a migrant background as not decisive for employment opportunities. I want to concentrate here on the first two groups in order to further examine the distinction my interviewers make when they describe their experiences based on their ethnicity. For most of the full-time employees I interviewed, ethnic origin had played a positive or advantageous role. The primary reason for this is that the media organizations seek to promote ethnic diversity in their newsrooms. And the interplay between ethnic background and professional experiences was decisive during the recruitment process. Apparently, being of non-German origin was, when combined with past work experiences, an advantage for the candidates. And this is here also confirmed by the story told by the German TV's first co-anchor woman with a migrant background. As of April 2007, Dunja Hayali, who is of Iraqi origin, co-anchors a primetime news show on the public broadcasting network ZDF. And she is the first co-anchor person with migrant background. And it was in 2007. According to an article published on the Deutsche Welle website, it was no secret that the broadcasting network ZDF has been looking for a presenter with a migrant background. And the article quotes Hasya Hayali as saying, that I will show here on the presentation. And searching also for a visible immigrant presenter seems to be a common strategy among those seeking to increase the number of employed journalists with migrant backgrounds. To be recruited as a visible migrant on TV can also be experienced as meaning that appearance takes precedence over qualification. And one journalist gave a drastic description of how he experienced his employment situation. And here the informant claims the distinction of being a token, a person who has awarded his position because of ethnic background rather than his qualification. And this decision from above, that is from the gatekeeper who decides on the recruitment of new staff, did not meet with animals' approval on the floor. And the informant later adds that he has not completed his academic or professional training and therefore does not meet all the formal requirements, formal job requirements, but due to the organizational decision aimed at furthering the participation of a journalist with migrant backgrounds, he was ranked higher than an applicant with a non-migrant biography. So, and his employers expected his knowledge of the Turkish community to compensate for his lack of formal education. And he will, they feel, have a special competence that the organization requires. And for this journalist, ethnic backgrounds has become an advantage. And the distinction between a token journalist and a normal, competent journalist is brought up in several interviews. The emphasis on the token role, which often leads to a distinction between being competent and being incompetent, can also stress the notion of a disadvantaged ethnic background. I want to illustrate my point with the following quote here. And unlike the informant mentioned above, she meets all the formal requirements for the job, but she associates foreign origin with having less competence, she by herself. And she hopes that the others do not have this association and is inclined to believe in the executive editor's answer, despite having experienced some ups and downs in her career. And during the interview, it becomes clear that she connects other observations on the difference between competence and incompetence to issues of ethnicity. And she gives another example from her time as a trainee. And it was also during her internship, she thought that the following assignment would provide an excellent training opportunity. And the assignment concerned a popular tourist site, nothing special or difficult. If she made mistakes, there would no serious consequences. And this being the case, it was a good training topic, she thought. In this situation, however, her biography appeared to be a barrier. She had come to Germany as an adult and so had not experienced growing up in the country. She had not learned about its culture from the cradle. She speaks German with a slight accent. And as a non-native, she observed she was not qualified to report on a local tourist attraction in radio. And marking ethnicity in relation to cultural knowledge of the majority culture, and therefore in contrast to competence, hints, I think, at an organizational culture that legitimizes inequality. Here, ethnicity functions as an excluding mechanism, one that serves to prevent a particular group of people from addressing certain topics and exclude others. Another female interviewer gives an additional example of an exclusionary mechanism based on ethnicity. She denies the existence of the migration bonus that Tayali, the first one, refers to in her own case. And this woman, who has been in the media business for more than 15 years, explained that there may be exceptional cases like Tayali's in general, but little has changed. And she feels being labeled as someone who does not fit in because of her appearance. And this is a typical mechanism for exclusion with respect to features or as appearance. It's a general exclusion, one which leaves the excluded only with two options: to assume a role behind the camera or as a relatively invisible person in radio or print media. And here, lasting inequalities have arisen. And to summarize, the main distinction in regard to employment, assignment, and migrant background are, on the one hand, the function of a different background as in plus, on which gives advantages, and on the other hand, the function of a different background as a minus, as something that is seen as a disadvantage. In other words, a migrant background is either perceived as giving competence or as causing incompetence. And this means that the main distinction is the dichotomy of competence and incompetence. Yes, so I switch over to the coverage of topics. In general, the employment of journalists with migrant backgrounds is linked to specific expectations. It does not matter whether they are recruited because of their different backgrounds or not. In the interviews, all observe that they are expected to be experts, and you have also mentioned it earlier, on their respective cultures. At one press edit, no, it's not this. As one press editor relates. So when it comes to topics related to one's person's own ethnic group, ethnicity is often seen as intrinsic to competence. And how can a person respond to this expectation? The interviews reveal two common patterns. The person may confirm the expectation and act accordingly, or he or she may fail to do so. If the latter, the person must develop strategies to survive the disappointment that this causes. And those media workers who are first-generation immigrants and who speak accented German are more recognizable immigrants. Hence, they find it more difficult to thwart this kind of expectation. And this means that they are given fewer opportunities to cover topics that are not directly related to immigration, as one newsman puts it. Oi. Mm-hmm. Okay, so if I have only 5 minutes.
Take 6, 7.
Okay, so I maybe switch to another part. What you are interested in? Okay, maybe to career. So Also, the various interviews disagree on the role different cultural backgrounds play in their career, and creating also career setbacks. Some claim that this plays a minor role, others maintain that it's a determining factor, and the latter is claimed by a first-generation immigrant journalist who does not see who does not see any chance of promotion because of cultural and ideological clashes. And according to this journalist, success goes hand in hand with assimilation for him, and which the journalist in question is not willing to accept.
Can I ask a question? All these people are of the same ethnic origin?
No. They are not. But I have not seen any changes or differences if there's one group or maybe Arabic or from the, so it's okay. It's more easier for European immigrants to fit in this. Yes, it's of course so. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I mean, maybe I can sum up. So. So I want to sum up the distinctions my informants make in observing their working conditions, and they vary a good deal since they are connected to the individuals and their observed experience. They are connected to the individuals and as communicated within the interview situation. Nevertheless, I see also four main patterns in their description of recruitment, working conditions, career possibilities, and their impact also on media reporting. And this is what I have also explained it in the recruitment process. Migrant background is seen as an advantage and one part of competence. And the second can be an advantage, yet implying a lack of competence. And the third, a disadvantage and implying a lack of competence, a disadvantage, and then not making any difference, although in all the answers also. And the first pattern refers to the example where migrant background is seen as added plus, as often connotes quite specific competence in intercultural issues, which is an advantage. And the second pattern summarizes the token discussion. Migrant background has become an advantage in order to get the job, but is also observed to imply a lack of corresponding competence. And here ethnicity is explicitly including, that means getting the job, and also implicitly excluding from career possibilities by being less formally qualified. The third pattern refers to exclusion mechanism at the working place regarding experience, accented speech, a lack of confidence. You cannot jump higher in the career ladder. And the fourth pattern has emerged in connection with all the discussed topics and is sometimes explicitly or implicitly expressed. For example, when an interviewer is generally satisfied with his/her career, meaning that migrant background is observed as part of competence, and ethnicity does not make a difference. But there are pauses that are attributed to general organizational requirements, such as training issues also. But generally, ethnicity can be described as generating difference in interviews, meaning construction processes. The ethnicity-related difference between being sufficiently or insufficiently competent is important when describing recruitment and job conditions. And in a manner of speaking, ethnicity generates difference when it comes to qualifications. And ethnicity can be intrinsic to competence, can even be seen as a plus, or even can be a part of incompetence and perceived as a minus. And interviews who have reason to feel a lack of competence because of their origin and belong to the latter group pay more attention to the issue of ethnic background and when they discuss job conditions and career opportunities. And as a result, career pauses and setbacks are often seen as related to ethnic origin. In this context, ethnicity functions as a mechanism for legitimizing inequalities. And I was at in the fall of 2007, a conference on migration and media was held in Berlin, and media workers, actors, and politicians and researchers with migrant backgrounds participated. And the essence of the utterance of media workers with migrant backgrounds was, we want to be normal, and we do not want to be asked where we come from. They did not wish to be token journalists or not be singled out on the basis of their ethnic background. Instead, they wished to be treated simply as competent media workers doing their job. But to my mind, the problem is not primarily related to being distinctive, but to the ways in which differences are treated. And if a different ethnic background is simply read as being less competent, and this leads to fewer or no job opportunities, then I think a multicultural society faces a serious problem. Thank you.